Who's this?
How's everybody this afternoon? I want to take just a minute and introduce Kent Sampson. Kent is the Assistant Director of Residential Life on the main campus. So I guess that means you make the beds in the morning.
That's right.
I don't know.
I'm in charge of injuries.
Not sure exactly. I don't know. He said something about falling off the ladder, but you know, everybody has that story. Ran into the door, you know, that story. But I guess maybe you did fall off the ladder.
I did. I'm not sure how much I should tell this group. It'll all automatically evaluate me.
My experience is the least becomes the better. But, I've known Ken a long time, probably about 20 years, when I was on the main campus. And he's a very positive guy. I know you will enjoy his presentation this afternoon. I'm confident he'll give us some good information about performance appraisals. I find it interesting that in a year with no raises and no money, this is the only guy, I think, that works for the university that has his own driver. Campbell's driving his own car. Sampson here has a driver, so that's, I guess residential life's pretty close.
There we go. That's auxiliaries. That's
With no further ado, Ken.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. I am glad to be over here with you today. Make a few announcements and kind of tell you where we're headed with the handout in a few minutes. Amjad Ayubi, I just wanted you to know who he is. We're in this deal together since we're all OSU. This is Amjad Ayubi. He works in our system at OSU in our conferencing area, our summer and year-round conferencing, housing those guests that help bring us in a lot of additional revenue during the summer to help keep our board rates as low as possible. And I truly wouldn't be here probably Tom and Sharon and others with Amjad wouldn't have consented to drive me, because I can do a lot of things these days, but I can't drive distances real far yet. And I'll get this out of the way early too. Tom had to open this up. We could go Saturday. I wasn't trying to save money on my place. I just was trying to, I like to do things at home. I'm not the most talented guy in town. But I was painting, and my wife had conveniently moved around the corner and was working another section house because she was on this project too. And about 6 square inches of finishing up, and tilted that way just far enough. I'm sure the safety officers here would reprimand me, no doubt, if I can tell the whole story here. But as I leaned just far enough over, the legs on my ladder walked out from underneath me and dumped me on the ladder about 8 or 9 feet. So broke a wrist, broke a finger, had a few slices on me, and I told Sharon, I said, hope you don't mind if I don't come dressed up with a tie, because I haven't been wearing many recently. That's one of the other problems, of being able to tie a tie right now. She said, that's okay, we'll still accept you. So I have done this program with some impairment before, but bear with me and we'll see how we do to get through this. On the Stillwater campus for about 4 or 5 years, I've been helping with personnel services in our campus deal with performance appraisal. And one of the most interesting things I learned over there years ago, that first year in fact, 4 or 5, was how many different systems and approaches are being utilized on the Stillwater campus to appraisal or evaluation of employees. I went in there like the naive lamb thinking, well, gee, we got one personnel department, surely everybody's doing this like we do. And boy, was I surprised. I came out of there and everybody left and said, send me handouts of your department and I'll send them of yours. And in fact, this is still a story today, because I don't know how many different instruments are being used on Stillwater campus, but I can tell you there are many plural. There's not one, even though First Help tried to move towards that a couple years ago. There is a standard one they recommend, but there's several different instruments over there we use right now. And I've been collecting those a few years while I've done this just to get a feel for this. So what I want to do is, based upon the information that Sharon has provided me about the 3 instruments that you all utilize here for classified, for your professional people, and for your faculty, spend a few minutes on that today, as well as take a look at some overall expectations that your institution here at Okmulgee, ours in Stillwater, has of us in terms of legal ramifications of appraisal and many others, including ethical and developmental also. Bear with me as I probably struggle through this a little bit with my handouts being just a little bit lame. Also, I've known Tom Dooley for a long time, and one of the things he told me, he said that if you get over in time, I'll buy you lunch, and that's all you should expect, and then you should leave town promptly after that. So I said, I'll do that. He also was honest. Now, Sharon and I don't know each other real well, but he was up front early. He said, by the way, in his phone conversation, we've asked about 15 people, and they've all had conflicts, can't do it, or whatever reason, so you're the 16th person on our list, so I sure hope you'll come and do it. He has a way of making you feel good about the opportunity to serve and do these things. So I'm here as the 16th person on the list, but there's no adage to that you get what you pay for. So you guys didn't pay a lot to be here today, so relax and take it easy and see if you can benefit from this experience on performance appraisal. I brought today, and Sharon and I didn't have a chance to exchange all the ideas about what your policy and procedure manual says about why you evaluate employees and what are the reasons behind that. One author at least once had suggested at least these 6. Why should we evaluate employees? Why should we appraise their performance? And I, by the way, commend the fact that you've got instruments that I've seen that has variants, and there are 3 different types that I've seen for you all that reflect different types of employees, different types of sort of skills, different sort of qualifications and education and focal points of their work. One author suggested there's at least these 6, and I'd like for you to feel free to expand upon these. And our OSU Policy and Procedure Manual, I noticed, made a little further comment. We ought to be doing at least with these 6 reasons. One is to provide feedback. We all need to have some reading on how we're doing the job. And let me precede this statement by this question. How many of you are evaluated right now, or have been? Is there anybody here who hasn't been evaluated normally on at least an annual basis since you've been at OSU Okmulgee? Anybody that hasn't? Well, I would contend, even if you raised your hand and said, "Oh, I haven't, Ken. I've been here 21 years, and I walk on water, or they don't really dare infringe or tackle me here." I would say, whether or not you know it, and whether or not you've ever had a form signed on you that you know of, somebody's evaluating, somebody's appraising your work. That'd be what I'd submit or suggest to you. Somebody's making an opinion. And by the way, it's not just the guy or lady who supervises you. It's people who are on your same level, people who report to you. People are collecting data on you and me all the time about how we do, and they are evaluating us. And some of that they hold to themselves, and some of that they don't. So the more that you and I can get some insight about how we do in our work environment from our supervisor, but also others, the more likely we're able to be productive as an employee. Feedback's a critical part of that. Maybe one of the most, elements most to be underscored is for feedback. Rapport. It's believed that the degree to which you and I have a dialogue about my job, Tom is my supervisor, the degree to which he holds me accountable that, but communicates to me along the year and months about what he expects of me, also opens up a rapport avenue. I respect him, I develop appreciation of his scope and job, and hopefully he does of me as well. So rapport is an important aspect. You developmental people in here would say number 3 maybe be the most important. Growth of those people involved. You or I may or may not, in many cases will not, be at the same job today, 10 years from now where we are today, either job description-wise or even location. There's an implication here that then says if we're ethical about working in positive work environments, we need to be doing whatever we can to help Tom Dooley or Larry or me or whoever get along the road of improvement so we can be the best employee we can be, whether it's at OSU Okmulgee or some other place later on. So I'd underscore the importance of one's growth and development is critical in evaluation of employees because it helps me get a roadmap. If Tom's my boss and Tom cares about me getting better, he ought to continue to challenge me, help me find some new ways to improve and grow. Maybe my scope of responsibility needs to be broadened over time. If he really wants me to become better, and you know what, if I get better, he may not always have me either. I may have more opportunities not only here, but elsewhere. And that should be an important component of why we evaluate employees. Help them grow, help them improve, get them down the road of life in their job area. Establishes performance limits. Depending upon your leadership and your managerial supervisory style, you may or may not relate to 4. But let me ask you this question. Have you ever had an employee, or are you one of those yourself, who if somebody doesn't define territory, it's all going to be yours. You're going to reach out there and conquer the whole world because you're ambitious and you're going to take everything that seems to be unanswered. Well, that's okay maybe in some environments. Sometimes that steps on toes. And I doubt anybody in here professionally have ever had yours stepped on or ever stepped on anybody else's. But many times that can happen in work environments, as you know. So it actually helps to define limits of where my scope of duty and responsibilities have to lie. So that's an important element of it, the determination of that. I tell you what Kent Sampson believes most is number 5. I mean, you can't rate them all as more or less important. They're all relevant. But I tell you why clarification of expectations is important to me is because the greatest number of times that I've had angry employees or their moms or dads or their lawyer, whoever it is, visiting with me about a disciplinary action is when the dust and smoke settled, they honestly, and sometimes there were situations I've been in maybe too where there wasn't honesty, but when you could boil it down, where they weren't sure enough of expectations. And folks, legally and ethically, you and I don't want to be behind the table if that person can prove that we really didn't make it clear to them what their job was, like a clear job description, like evaluating them on an ongoing basis and rating that, like a plan of how they might improve if they had liabilities. Hey, unfortunately in society it's going more that way. You better have your paper trail in education and government agencies and so forth. You better have your paper trail there. And the one I don't want to ever lose on is lack of clear expectations. In Stillwater about 4 years ago, a little longer, I sat upon a grievance committee of an employee who came forward, and this was her allegation to the department head. I've been terminated. By the way, it was a complicated issue because she also happened to be a minority individual. So she was also concerned with that dimension. But in addition to what she was raising there, she says, hey, I haven't done my job. I'll admit to that. I'll tell you why. The guy, department head who's sitting across the table from her is saying, and she's alleging, that she doesn't have a job description. Now, folks, if he couldn't produce a job description and she said I didn't understand expectations, who do you think's going to win that one? You and I don't want to be in that position. And that was a compromising moment. Was there a job description? Well, yeah, there was something. But ultimately, there was a lot of ambiguity in that. And you know, how you like being one of those employees who has to review and do that. I'm sure you all have a process or procedure like that over here to review an aggrieved employee. Well, you don't want to lose on expectation because that's the guts of what you and I do in our jobs, in our teaching, our research, or in our very areas of responsibility, our city services component there. 6, it acknowledges individuality. This relates a lot to me, to number 3. If I'm evaluating Amjad, or he is me, I'm dealing with him as an individual in that work environment, different than I would Ken if I'm also evaluating Ken. We're 2 different people. Maybe the job title is the same, but I should be dealing with them not only the similar job description, but also the uniquenesses that they bring to the job. So good performance appraisal acknowledges individuality. It makes you and me feel a little bit better about who we are and what we bring to the table to contribute. Over at Stillwater, a few years ago, some sage no doubt put this together, and in our in our policy and procedure manual, OSU, our branch campus over there in Stillwater, we're the branch over there today, is that these 5. They say, why evaluate employees? 1, so that you can determine staff merit pay increases. It comes down to that sometime, doesn't it? If you've got a superior employee and an average or one needing improvement, you want to give the same wage increase that you're able to give? Most of us would say, no, I'd rather reward greater if I could the superior performer. 1 is also to identify staff for promotion. You're going to promote the people who are average, if you will, or subpar. Not that year, maybe, if they're average. Maybe in another year if you bring them along if they develop. That's another reason that was identified in the manual that we utilized. Informing staff of deficiencies, training needs, and improvement expected. That certainly is partly spoken to there. Justifying disciplinary actions. Hey, the downside of performance appraisal is sometimes we got to tell people things that they would rather not hear. But folks, if you and I don't do it, A, who's going to do it? And B, how are you going to enable them to improve or come towards the direction you want them to if you don't give them those decisions or that insight? That's the 4th one. And lastly, and one of those that none of us would rather mention either, but in difficult financial times, The fifth one identified in our policies and procedures manual there states identification of staff for layoff during emergency reductions in workforce. Heaven forbid. None of us want to face or see that, but if we did, you need to have a way of figuring out who stays around and who doesn't. That's pretty negative. Nothing that I'd really like to talk a lot about today. Though we've had layoffs from Stillwater campus and physical plant in the last year. And there had to be decisions made on how that was done. So a little bit of an insight there from both what some authors have said and what our policy and procedure manual says. What else would you add to that? I'm going to talk a lot today and wade you through our handout, but I really appreciate questions along the way and comments and elaborations on some of this. So it's now that time. Why else would you say, in your experience or background, it's important to evaluate employees? Would you elaborate on these further or have additions to this list? Why do it? We have better use for our time, probably, don't we? If we really want, something else we could do with our time, maybe not better use of it. But I don't know of anybody who couldn't use those hours another way, productively. But we do it. Maybe somebody requires us to, or maybe institution or educational philosophy. Any other reasons that you would add to this list on why evaluate employees?
Well, it could provide encouragement if it was positive, and that individual knew it was for his benefit or her benefit. It could provide encouragement for that employee to do the job better.
That's right. It could really provide them encouragement. And one of the things you're going to hear me say a little bit more about in a minute as it relates to feedback is that issue of encouragement. I'm one of those people who believe, hey, you and I are going to get plenty, and up to this road in our life, somebody along the way, start with mom and dad or siblings. As you grew up, people give you feedback along the way about what you were as a person. They have, particularly the family unit. And generally, are we better as humans about giving negative or positive feedback? What do you think? What are we best at? What do we do the most of? Isn't that interesting? I believe you're right. Didn't human nature say, well, I know Ken Morris a few years, and he's a heck of a guy. He worked hard. He's the chair of the staff advisory council over there. However, you ever hear those words, those but, ifs, howevers? Oh, Ken didn't get such and such done in the staff council, or this or that or the other. Why is it that we pick that up in people rather than saying, did you see the things they accomplished during the year he was chair of the staff advisory council? I'll be darned. Isn't that interesting on human nature? Why we tend to do that stuff? We do, a lot of us. One of the things, picking up on your point on feedback, we'll deal with in a minute, is how much more we many times can help people develop or grow in our jobs when we use positive reinforcing behavior and comments, given that opportunity to improve. Any other additions to why do it? Value in your experience, whether it's been here at Okmulgee or elsewhere? Okay, let me move on. I think it's critical that we kind of begin with this little cornerstone of at least my philosophy. A lot of other people believe this and they use different words sometimes. In Stillwater, I'm not exactly sure now, Sharon, how you all are implementing your new plans, so I won't try to quote something too much out of context. But over there, I know that I am told that I am to be sure all my full-time employees are evaluated at least once a year. That's an expectation of me. In a departmental area, I have responsibility. All full-timers classified in A&P are evaluated at least once a year. That's my duty, job. And the policy and procedure manual says, thou shalt do that. That is what I call number 2, the summative part of appraisal. Giving a person at least once annual, semi-annual, somewhat formal, you might do it semi-annual, but it's going to be a paper and pencil instrument like the ones you shared with me. There's going to be things on it in writing, shared, discussed, signed by the right people, dated, and given back. That's what I call summative feedback or summative appraisal, and increasingly institutions, organizations are told, thou shalt do that. You will do that. Ethical reasons for that, developmental and certainly legal. We're in a different time than a lot of us were when we started this work a few years ago. But I'll tell you what I think is the breakfast of champions here and feedback as it relates to development, the person getting better, is what I call formative, number 1. Granted, if Amjad's evaluating me and he gives me on a mythical scale, 1's a poor employee, 5's great, he gives me a 4. Well, there's no doubt that he then and others who need to know I'm a 4, whatever good that it does for me. I'm a 4, so officially he's done his summative duty. He's fulfilled the duty of the university. What's a lot more important to me as an employee and getting through life in my job is in that 12-month period what he did for me along the road. For example, I've got he's told me, "Kid, you need to be in your office by 8 a.m. every morning because there's a lot of phone calls and student traffic. You need to be there." It's an expectation. But he finds I'm showing up at 8:30 regularly. But he's told me the other. Well, Amjad's got a couple quick decisions on that. He can either say, "Well, gosh, he's a great guy, I'll give him a little more time," or he can say, "Hey, remember we said 8, and there are questions going on unanswered in that 30 minutes?" And he lets that float a while until it becomes an issue in the staff or the department because others maybe do that. Well, if he cares about me getting better, he's going to confront me and question me on that and say, "Hey, Ken, you know, agreement is you need to be here by 8 o'clock because the phone calls and the visits that we get, university administrators or parents or faculty, you need to be here at 8 and you're not making it due to these times I've found that out." Now, if his motive in a negative reinforcement way is, "Well, I knew he wouldn't work out," is to all of a sudden, after the 5th time, he puts me on probation and he's never said anything about it before. And how developmental or helpful do you think that is? Wow, I've been here 3 months, yeah, I took advantage of it, I'm on probation, now I'm on his real question mark list and I may not be around longer. Now, folks, I'm talking about investment in people. Let me ask you, where do you want to spend your time? Do you want to spend your time trying to browbeat people or to try to help them get where they can in a positive way? I think I know where he'd rather spend our energy, but sometimes by decisions I make, or if Amjad didn't confront me early enough, all of a sudden we've gone into a negative environment because, hey, was I irresponsible? Yeah, I was missing the call, I got to take the duty for that. But also, he as a supervisor has a duty to correct me or call my hand. And maybe before he'd say, "You're on probation, friend," is he might say, "Hey, here's a caution, you need to know this, and this is why it's important to me," and to translate why that's important. What am I saying? I'm saying it's a whole lot more important to give me formative feedback throughout the year regularly, day by day, frankly, than that annual number 4 that he just gave me. I'm going to get better at my job and be better for a longer time in my career than just on the 4s that I get once a year or the 2s or whatever. And then it gets back ethically. What's his duty to employees? You know, sometimes I think we take the attitude and approach, well, this guy or lady's only going to be good for 3 years anyway. We'll get the best out of them and send them on their way. And I'm thinking, what a waste of human potential. Mine, if I'm the supervisor, how many times I want to train people in this job? And that person's, in terms of what his or her worth is. I mean, do we want them to come in and spend about 3 years this whole issue of how much control do you keep under your chest versus how much do you give to other people so they can make decisions or delegation? I mean, some reasonable degree to that. Formative does suggest that. One author called this gunny sacking. You know what gunny sacking is? Gunny sacking is the propensity or tendency that some of us have, like on my example of Amjad. He sees that I've been late, and instead of saying something about it on the second or first, third time, he says, "Well, he shouldn't do that." He says, "But I'll get to that later," in his mind. So he puts it in a sack, and he moves on along here, and here we are 2 months later. Now, I've made a statement to a student employee that's really not appropriate, embarrassed the employment. I'm not going to say sexual harassment here, but maybe something that really made that person feel put down. And Amjad hears that, and rather than questioning me, he says, "Well, that didn't sound right, but I'll come back to that." Throws that in the sack. And he moves on out here 4 or 5 or 8 months later, and Amjad's got this sack, this gunny sack of about 7 things that probably none of which would necessarily cause my termination or maybe even probation, but I could have done better. And guess what? We sit down for the performance appraisal one day, or he just decides one day, hey, it's time. And he comes up to my desk or in my office and he dumps his sack on my chair or desk. And he says, "By the way, kid, boy, back 6 months ago, you know, you were really having some problems attending on time. And you remember that statement you made to that employee? And you know, if you're like me, 8 months later, how many of those are you going to have good focus on or relate to or understand? Not many. I needed to hear it then. If he wants me to get better, don't gunny sack me one day, give me the whole load, so to speak, and think I'm going to understand or relate to that. And then humanly, how do you think I'm probably going to feel about that, even if I don't tell him? Since he signs my paycheck, I may not tell him that. How do you think I'm going to feel about that if he drops that on my desk? Like, "Oh, John, you so-and-so," or something like that. Because he surprised me. What I'm saying is, if we care about employees' growth and improvement, our job is to give them ongoing feedback. Feedback is what's called to me the breakfast of champions. Not Cheerios, but feedback is the breakfast of champions. And it begins with a formative approach. feedback along the way. Some of it is a formal annual stuff we got to do, or semi-annual on paper and pencil. Important, critical part of the paper trail, an important part of the plan for improvement, but it doesn't stand alone. If I'm going to get better, help my people get better, I need to give them the formative, the ongoing. Comments or questions with that? Either take the task or things you'd add to that, or experiences you've had with that?
Yeah,
Tom, I'm sorry.
Ideally, how often should summative evaluation take place?
At a minimum, in my opinion, at a minimum of once a year, at a minimum, I think an optimum would be at least semi-annual. Because a year's, to me, a long time for things to go before I'm giving you, or you're giving me kind of a semi-annual 6-month checkup, you know? Ideally, I think semi-annual. Quarterly, I don't think, given our work environments many times and pressures, it's probably realistic. But I hope quarterly is probably being taken care of through my formative effort. I'd say ideally, an optimum would be semi-annually, but at a minimum of once a year. Because you're dealing with promotions, then you're dealing with salary, wage increases, and that sort of thing. Tom?
Could you talk a minute about the fact that there are some employees, some people that take constructive criticism or take the fact that you're coming in late, 30 minutes late, they accept that better than other people. You know, other people have a real difficult time accepting that. Are there any tricks or, not tricks, but tips maybe to deal with the person that has a difficult time taking the constructive criticism?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate your tip. When Tom and I talked on the phone, he says, now, along the way, if you're stumbling, if you're getting too wordy, I'm going to cue you and kind of help move you on. Tom, thank you.
I'm not going to talk to you on that.
Yeah, there are, and I'm going to come to that. I've got a section here in a few minutes, about 20 minutes of this, that deals with the employee who is either, who's not doing very well, or is skeptical of this whole process. And not just Kent's, but several people's ideas about how you deal with that employee. So if it's okay, I'm going to come back to that. It's a critical part of this, because to be honest, this isn't a natural thing for a lot of us to go through. We'll come to that. And hold me to that once we get there. If I'm not getting on enough, y'all. Let me quickly, I put this together in a format that I hope will flow reasonably well for this crew today. And believe it or not, I've orchestrated my overheads with the handout, so hopefully you can keep up with me here and vice versa. I'm going to spend a few minutes on feedback as we get into this. Talk a little bit about that chart on page 2, the performance appraisal cycle, some critical elements that have to be linked together. How to conduct is page 3, those 8 elements, and then, Tom, I get into dealing with the skeptical employee or the person who's not doing very well. An important aspect is appraisal pitfalls. Did you know that you and I tend, based upon our personality or our upbringing, things that we believe about how we deal with other people, to make judgments certain ways, and that's what I'm going to talk about on the pitfalls, number 4. I put in there, just as a hands-on document, a service agreement that can be utilized between a supervisor and supervisee that's helpful sometimes in coming to some agreements. You know, you can't try to nail things down, and so what you finally get at that by each committee to do something. The service agreement is on page 6 I offer. I couldn't help but steal, you know, the best people I know that share ideas are actually thieves. You know, they usually find these ideas from somebody else, so I plead guilty on this. I put in there from Spencer & Johnson's 1-Minute Manager, you know, when they were, and by the way, this really perturbs me about, you know, Johnson & Blanchard, the 1-Minute Manager. And if you've read their little 113-page book, you feel the same way. These yo-yos 10 years ago put in this little easy read, I mean, you go read this book in 25 minutes. They put in a little book 10 years ago, something you and I really practically do know, but dadgum, they marketed and sold it and made $1 million. We're going to talk a little bit about the 1-minute appraising, 1-minute reprimand, 1-minute goal setting as a tool or a method or mechanism to help people evaluate and give direction and instruction. And that's, of course, in the handout, page 7. And then a couple of additionals I just put in there. We won't spend a lot of time on today, but 8, 9, and 10. 8 and 9, the negative and positive nonverbal behaviors. I'll spend a little bit of time on that, helping you and me realize how we come across and how it affects people's performance sometimes. But some thoughts I'll leave with you on that from the handout. Staff member that I've been acquainted with a few years, Marilyn Michael at the University of Illinois a few years ago, generated this list of 101 ways to show people that you care about them. Hey, I think you can be firm and direct with people and still show them care. Think about child rearing. Hey, anybody here have children? Do you love them? Do you have to be firm with them? Oh, I guess so. Wouldn't hurt, would it? Well, have you ever thought maybe that has some application in dealing with employees? Well, maybe some days, depending on, my 16-year-old called me just before I came up here. The question she asked me made me think she was on another planet, but for the most part, normally, that's reinforcement support to your youngsters, like those who work with you and for you, say, treat me fairly, but treat me firmly. We really do want guidance and direction, most of us, and therefore a chance to succeed. And then lastly, for those of you more interested, kind of selected bibliography, a couple pages there on this area, if you want to look and do some more homework or research. I'm in debt partially to Bill Porter, who is now at the University of Georgia, but did his degree, his dissertation at OSU. And Bill Porter's study was of higher education administrators' evaluation of people in administrative fields in higher education. Pretty interesting study. So if you're ever interested in that, part of that is Bill's dissertation. I'd be glad to share it himself. He's done some homework on this. So with that as a roadmap then, let me get on started beyond some of the introductions. Let's talk about the Breakfast of Champions a little bit more for a couple minutes feedback. 8 components there, and again, that should be in your handout if you care to make notes or write on the side. As you've already heard from me, my bias is that feedback is a way of helping another person grow or improve or get to where he or she needs to be. It's also a way of changing, modifying behavior. It's a way of giving that person information about how they come across to and deal with other people. And I guess the core of why we appraise, evaluate employees ought to be to give them constructive feedback, helpful data, helpful direction, helpful feedback. Here's 8 components that I'd share with you briefly. One is it's descriptive rather than evaluative. And as the byline says there, if we can avoid evaluative language, it reduces the need for the individual to react defensively. In other words, what I'm talking about with being descriptive rather than evaluative, if Ken's evaluating me, I know I am smart enough to figure out when this is over, Ken and my little session together, somehow he's going to tell me how I stood with him, a number or a grade or something. I figured that out, even if I'm a new employee. But you know what I'd really like to hear from Ken to get better, to improve, is, and maybe sometimes I wouldn't want to hear this, to be frank, but if I'm going to get better and Ken wants me to, it'd be helpful if he describes what I need to get better at. Sometimes it's as specific as, hey, you're regularly 30 minutes late for the job that I told you to be there 30 minutes early. Or it might be, have you thought about the fact that your follow-up on some of the paperwork that we've asked you to do is not there? And then get specific. It describes what my shortcomings are. Because, hey, I know I'm going to get a score on that annual appraisal from Ken. And truthfully, whether or not we sit down once a year or not, he's scoring it. You're getting scored by somebody daily, your supervisor and others. So in that formal effort, he's going to do that. And what I'd say is describes what I am or am not doing. It helps me more than just attaching a number. You see the difference there in terms of motivation of the employee? It tells me, gives me that feedback. Secondly, it's specific rather than general. An example there is to be told that you're dominating probably hasn't given that person one iota of insight they didn't have. If you're a dominating person, the guy says that to you, you're thinking, well, can you tell me something else to do? What you need to do to help him translate what you mean by that, or cite examples in particular, is to say, and by the way, Ken, that domination of people gets in your way, and here's how, here's why. Your dominating nature means that people shut up around your meetings, or you don't get the best ideas because you have to control that, as an example. That's what I mean by getting fairly specific rather than generalities of, well, you're a dominating character. Well, thanks, I knew that. My mom told me that when she sent me off. She knew that too. That didn't resolve how I'm doing in the job or where I need to improve at. Thirdly, it takes into account the needs of both the receiver and the giver of feedback. The reason I think this instrument, this concept is important in a real positive, constructive way is because seldom do you or I see things the same way. Not exactly. And have you ever had a conflict with somebody you work with or in your home about who perceives something one way and somebody else another? I mean, is that real world or not? That's pretty frequent happening, unfortunately, in life. Folks, I believe that the degree to which the receiver and sender communicate lessens the likelihood, the probability that there'll be problems or major errors caused due to the lack of being on the same wavelength. Two-wayness of feedback helps to provide some important data both ways, checks and balances of that flow. Fourthly, it's directed towards behavior that the receiver can do something about. I know one of your senior trusted people over here is George Babb, and I know folks in our dining hotel restaurant people know George. And, George and I are working on a committee long distance, I guess, for this NASPAW conference. And I'd say if his boss was trying to give George some feedback about something he's doing in his work environment, if he's going to receive it very well and do anything with it, it needs to be something he can do something about. He needs to have the willingness, but it also needs to be something he can do something about. Hey, if you're expecting me and my job to really have a great knowledge of statistics and analysis of data, but the job you hired me for didn't require that, either A, you better help me, send me back and get some education, let me develop that skill a little bit further, or B, you need to get somebody else to do it since you didn't ask me to have that skill to start with, or give me time to develop it. But don't expect me to be a statistical analyst for you if I don't have some of that background or training. So it's something that George, in this example, or Kent can do something about is critical here, rather than hold me accountable for analyses that I'm not qualified or capable of doing, given that my job description didn't say I had to be able to do all those things. Now, if I'm supposed to have had that and you selected me, that's another question on this. Okay? What I mean on number 5 is it's solicited rather than imposed. Follow me in the reading there. Feedback is most useful when the receiver himself or herself has formulated the kind of questions which those observing can answer. I need to be able to talk with the person I'm supervising and raise questions enough that they can figure out what it is that I'm concerned about or raising. I need to be able to interact with them on this communication level so that my questions and interaction help to formulate what the real problem is, thereby trying to solicit from them rather than imposing this. What I'm getting at is, I guess, the old Socratic method of using questions. You know, if it's a one-way evaluation, I'm doing all the talking, and I'm not learning much from that other person. You know? So questioning, educare, from education is that Latin word meaning to draw out, I think to bring out, to truly educate means to draw out of the person what they have within them. That's part of this context, I think. That's what I'm talking about, is to draw from that person that educational insight. What they can do about it, how they're progressing. It's well timed. I've already used the example with Amjad about the sooner I get the feedback, the better I'm going to respond and act upon that. So in close time proximity, and also when I am at my head and my heart are at the right place. You know, if I just had a death in my family, or my kid just flunked out of college, yesterday I found that out, and I'm sitting down to evaluate Ken tomorrow, that's on the schedule at least. You think it's wise for me to still do that with him the next day? Might be for some people, but for 85 out of 100 of us, I need to reschedule with him in terms of this feedback. Because my whole emotional balance and stability might be tilted one way or the other, depending on what's going on in my life. So the timing is real important here to be effective and objective with Ken. It's checked to ensure clear communication, number 7. What that's talking about, folks, is the two-way nature. And I think the word sometimes used is paraphrase, the chance to have a person say something and check out with them what they said by asking questions back or saying, did you say that really? What do you mean by that? Two-way interaction on that. Check to ensure clear communication. And 8, kind of a unique dimension, but something to be aware of. When feedback is given in a group, both the giver and receiver have the opportunity to check with others in the group regarding the accuracy of the feedback. Is this one person's impression or impression shared by others? Now, most of us, of course, aren't going to evaluate people in a group. But by the way, in the Bill Porter dissertation study of about 9 years ago, even 9 years ago, I was amazed how many, these were higher education institutions, were using group feedback to evaluate employees. Now, how that was gathered was very, divergent. And again, truthfully, do you think you and I are evaluated only by our single supervisor? We've already laid the ground down. I think we're not totally fully, even though that person may write down the score. But we are evaluated. Over time, those people have some input and impact upon our supervisor, by the way, or our colleagues. So there is some degree to which group feedback is going on regularly, and I think it's important here how that's handled or utilized in a group situation. And I'm not saying 6 people sit down and evaluate on Ken today, but I am saying that does go on informally. We need to recognize that and help to channel that. So, summary on the feedback, it's a way of giving helpful direction, helpful corrective notions to the person that helps them match up. It's a good way of helping a person professionally answer who I am. I'm going to make a shift here. Moving on. Any comment or question about feedback? It's the core, then, I'm saying, of effective appraisal. Is your desire, not because I told you to, or because Sheriff or somebody writes this down in the policy, thou shalt evaluate and provide good feedback. If you really care about the job and who it is you're working with, I hope you're motivated to give them feedback. I want it in life, probably you do. Don't always like what I hear, but if the person's sincere, maybe that helps me get better or get on down the road of what I'm going to be and where I'm going to go personally and professionally in life. And hey, one other twist about appraisal I want to mention. How many of us really separate job from personal life? How many of us really are able to do that, even though a lot of people in management tell us we need to or have to? In other words, another way of asking that is, how much does your personal life affect your work? Or does it at all? I guess my contention would be today, whether or not you admit it, how things are going on in my life have effect, obviously, on me at work. And therefore, we as supervisors need to have some insight. Now, I'm not saying keep a detailed account of a person's personal lifestyle. That's not your or my business. But I do think the degree to which I know how my employee is doing in life, if that person has experienced a divorce, or if that person's going through some trauma with a dying parent at home, do you think that influences them at work? Why, sure. Are we in touch with that? Do we even know that? Might be a good question. Very briefly, I see our performance appraisal efforts in a bit of a cycle. And it starts with the standard or job expectation. In other words, I talked about it earlier, the criticalness of you and me knowing what's expected of us in our job. It starts there with that. So I give somebody, I hire them, I give them a document that says you ought to do these things. Here's what's expected of you. It starts there. Then you move into the cyclic process, if you would. That's a 4-stage process. Secondly, and I'm using a couple of words that Stillwater we use on the job description when I say major responsibilities, but you begin the evaluation period, record major responsibilities and handing on individual evaluation forms. Our job descriptions say something like 4 major, Kent, you've got 4 major responsibilities. Break it out in percentage time, and apply this according, of course, in your own situation here in Okmulgee now. Whatever your major duties and responsibilities are, obviously should be taking most of your time, should be the things that you're primarily evaluated on and ranked or scored on your form. So it begins with that sort of process of recording major responsibilities and getting some idea of where people should be spending their time. During step 3, during the evaluation period, this continuous feedback I've talked about is given. It's continued to be provided and circled or circulated to employees on how they're performing. Folks, step 3 is that paper trail in which you document for the file events that are both positive and negative. Hey, if a person's not getting the job done, you need to tell them, and there's a point at which you need to be writing it up. You better have a paper trail, more and more if you're going to terminate somebody. Tough news if you're going to fire somebody, it's a surprise to them. In fact, you better be sure you convince your boss that it wasn't a surprise to them if you let it go. How do you get there and be protected and keep yourself and other people out of court? One of the ways is to have a reasonable paper trail. And I would underscore the positive side again as well. Hey, we're going to find the liabilities, but what about clipping the fact that, oh yeah, I saw he was working in the Community United Way. Tell him that, you appreciate it. What's wrong with putting it in his file? And when you evaluate him at that time, you're saying, hey, Larry, I saw that you were chairman of the Special Projects Committee for the Okmulgee United Way. And I know we collectively help the community raise funds for good causes. Thanks for doing that. Appreciate it. Did you do that? You ever thought about doing that? Tell them what's good about them ongoing, but it's a good time to do it in their annual appraisal too. Give them the good news too. Fourthly, in the evaluation period, do the performance review, preferably with employee input according to guidelines. I have a bias. You may disagree with this, but it's all about feedback and two-way communication. We call now and here gets into a little bit of this divergency on the Stillwater campus about forms and circulation. You know, you can go to any college or vice presidential area and say, well, give me a copy of your appraisal instrument. I'd be interested to see what you got back. Most of them wouldn't be duplicates for sure. Though I think the institution, by the way, is moving towards that slowly and shaking the trees a little bit to a degree. In our case, in student service, I'm under a guy named Ron Beer, Vice President of Student Services. For about 8 or 9 years, we've had this performance appraisal instrument. It's 9 pages long. It's not as scary as you think. And it's a hot-cold continuum from 1 to 9. 1, Kent, you're not doing the job, you know you're off the train soon if you don't get better. And 9 or 10 is what a good citizen you are, you're doing outstanding, and everywhere in between. And by the way, this instrument is well written. It's a Likert scale then, but it's well written. It's helpful at least in that there are descriptive comments about if I'm a 1 or 9 or 5, and if a place to do a lot of writing. And what's most important to me about our instrument are 2 things. One is I think questions 13 and 14 are open-ended. And 13 says, Kent, what are the things that you know you need to get better at and do better at this next year? That's an open-ended question. It wasn't like rate Kent on dependability from 1 to 10, Mr. Supervisor. It was, Kent, what do you need to do better in next year? And what are you willing to do that? That's like question 13 on the last page. And question 14 is, guess what? List things that you've done during this year that you feel good about. Things that you personally maybe, but particularly professionally, think you've achieved and accomplished. And that's really good to have a chance to say that to your supervisor, because the supervisor is going to have the insightfulness always, particularly if he or she supervises a lot of people, understand that? Not always. It's a chance, if you would, for you to kind of brag about who you are professionally, like you chaired a regional committee, or like you're responsible for getting an inroad into recruitment into a particular high school. And you're proud of that. You had something to do to help further the institution's goals. I like those 2 open-ended questions. If it wasn't for those 2, I'd rank our scale a lot lower. It's helpful. Without those 2, it's not as full-blown. Well, what you should be doing at this particular point then in terms of the evaluation period performance review is utilizing that information with the employee. And I told you there are 2 reasons I liked our instrument. One's those 2 open-ended questions, and the other one is this. We use our tool, and Sharon, again, I don't know all the details yet about where you all are going with the instrument, but I encourage you all to consider it as a talk tool. What does a talk tool mean? And you know, Ken well recognizes and remembers this probably, even though he has different divisions, he probably approaches this different in Stillwater. But the talk tool approach says, here's that 9-page form. Ken's my supervisor. He says, Ken, 'tis the season. We're going to have to go through this appraisal pretty soon. So here's the form. I'm going to give you 2 weeks to rate yourself. How are you doing on those 9 pages, on those scales? And by the way, don't forget to answer questions 13 to 14. Those are important to me. Let's set up a time, Kent, in 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, in which we'll get back together. And by the way, while you're rating yourself on those things, I'm going to rate you too. That's my job as your supervisor. Now, when we get back together in 2 weeks on this day here, we're going to set it today if that's okay. We're going to sit down and use this as a talk tool. And what we're going to do is talk about how Kent, you perceive yourself doing your job and how I do as your supervisor. And that's how we use that instrument. And that's how that's been extremely helpful to me. Now, I'll tell you, now again, supervisors have a little different tacks on this. My feeling is if there's one standard deviation between how Kent evaluated me and how I did, at least from the supervisor's perspective, I don't care about that. I don't worry. In fact, in many cases, if it's a 1.5 or 2, I'm not very worried about that. In other words, if on dependability I had myself at a 6, and Ken's had it at an 8, he's my supervisor, then great, he thinks I'm even more dependable than I do. Or if it's one discrepancy, one way or the other. But if there's a spread of 2.5, maybe even 2 on the right point, or 4 or 5, guess what we have just found? Subject of discussion. Ken says, well, Kent, you're a heck of a citizen, but you're a 3 on dependability. Oh, but Ken, I'm an 8. Look what I do. You think that's subject fertile ground to discuss? It may not be fun. Do I need to hear it from my supervisor if he's got me at 3 and I'm at an 8? Sounds pretty important if I want to stay on the payroll to me. The tool as a talk tool is what I'm saying, so that Ken and he doesn't have the element of surprise on me so much for saying, if I don't see the instrument, I think, what's the criteria again? What's he gonna tell me in 2 weeks and what I need to be prepared for? Do you think I'm less anxious when I sit down with him in 2 weeks if I've rated myself and thought about the instrument than if he just pulls it out one day and says, here's your copy in here, let's go? Hey, a lot of folks have probably spent some uneasy nights the night before when they haven't known what the ground rules were, haven't they? Haven't you and I maybe? That's why I encourage the use of something like this. It's what I call a talk tool. That's why I think it's an important and helpful instrument. That rotates us on into step 5. The closing of the 1 year or that summative evaluation period, starting a new one, which by the way then jumps back to step 2. Discussion of employee plans, expectations, standards for the coming period. And these can be documented, should be. I feel really strongly if Ken had me at a 3 and I got myself at an 8 on anything, or even much closer than that on spread, he needs to be sure when we wrap this up, if I'm still in the payroll, if there's that much discrepancy, I'm still around, he needs to be sure we are in agreement on what I need to do to improve this next year. Do I need some more training and instruction? Do I need more closer supervision? Do I need to meet with him weekly instead of once a month? He needs to help me formulate a plan, Ken, that you're going to hold me accountable to, that you're going to say, he's not getting these things done. I don't know if I even know all the reasons as to why he's not, but I need to check in more often. So whatever method, there needs to be a plan to get at that. And I found increasingly in recent years, and maybe it's because of my job diversifying a little bit more, you know what I found? I don't know if this would be true in your case, in your situation, all as a supervisor, person working with employees. You know what I found increasingly people need to do better in their jobs is more skill development, training, and education. That's what I'm continuing to find, is that people aren't failing because they aren't trying. But just relate to this briefly in our maintenance department. I'm sure those of you that relate well to this area and work in this area, have employees, are like the rest of us really intrigued with these more federal legislation. And now on the control of fluorohydrocarbons, I'm sure I'm saying that word wrong, I'm not an expert on this. Bottom line is control of the emissions into our ozone, on our coolants. And so that now everything from how we get our cars' air conditioner serviced to freezers and refrigerators are greatly changing. Now, do you think people who are going to work in refrigeration in the report to you, if you're in that area, need to be updated, educated to deal with equipment safely, to follow compliance and expectations of federal law? You bet your life. Can they do it if they depend upon 1980 education in this area? No way. But you're going to hold them accountable? It's an example of training and education. If we don't keep our people tuned in and upgraded on that, all sort of issues, not to speak of their frustration and failure and other problems are going to develop from that. So I think it's critical that we keep that in mind. And I just share that from personal anecdote aside is that's what I'm hearing a lot of diverse people I work with in my area. Hey, I need more training and education in this. What are the, most of us have been on the face of the earth long enough and in work to know, isn't it neat how there are some trendy things that are always out there about what we should do? And what is it? What are the three letters now, 3 words that are the buzzwords now of appropriate management? TQM, total quality management. I think that's the right word. Here's somebody's come up with some ideas, and some of you sitting out saying, if you've read anything, that sounds commonsensical to me. I've been doing that, or been trying to do that for years. Probably makes you mad like it does me. Somebody publish it again, got some more money, making royalties off this. But bottom line is, though the words may change, I think a lot of the principles that we talk about sometimes don't greatly if we're trying to deal effectively with people. I think TQM is another. By the way, if you've studied TQM, I found this interesting. TQM would differ a little bit today with where Stillwater and Okmulgee are about giving people scores, evaluations, ratings. They would say that may be more detrimental than helpful. So that's a whole other discussion, whether we get that today, some or another point in time. To what degree do we leave a person with a ranking or rating score, and how does that balance with what the university policy is for promotions, raised, tenure, whatever? Interesting question, and there are some differences there for sure, and that's one in TQM today. Any questions or comments before we move into the how-tos first? Should have a handout on that. Okay, the how-tos. 8 components of this: how to conduct a performance appraisal. And as I remind you, more harm than good will occur if this isn't done with some far side of this with some planning. It's designed to provide an effective foundation for understanding the good evaluation methods. And here are some of the prior to conducting the session, some careful planning is necessary. Some of the elements to be considered are these 8. A, schedule an appointment and allow sufficient time. Select a time when you and the employer are not under great pressure. I've already given the example of that a while ago in terms of time constraints and pressure. And I appreciate Larry's question about how often do you think you should do the summative a while ago. Well, another opinion that I have, I would never tackle a performance appraisal on one single person with less than 1 hour schedule. And I might even be prepared to give it, depending on who that person was, I might even want to be prepared to go an hour and a quarter, an hour and a half, even though that's getting lengthy. You know your style and that person, you make that judgment. But I'll guarantee you for most of us, with any instrument of any value, 30 minutes won't do it. And I'm one of those who believe in the continuity of discussion and interaction on this, and would say, if humanly possible, don't truncate it. Don't spend 40 minutes with them and say, whoops, gotta go pick up my daughter at school, we'll finish tomorrow, and spend the other 40 minutes tomorrow. You've lost some continuity of that interaction that may cost you and that person later. That's why I think you get into it, get it over, and get it done with in one temporal sequence there. I think that's real important. That's why I say schedule adequate time to do it then. That's my recommendation. B is provide for privacy with absolute minimum interruptions. On this, to me, this time is sacred, and I'm not going to allow interruptions. I guess, you know, if the fire marshal comes and hauls me out or our alarm goes off, I guess I'm going to evacuate the building like I'm supposed to. But other than that, my secretary does not forward calls to me. She doesn't come into the office, nor does anybody else. The door is closed, or the conference room, wherever. Everything is held while I've got that time, that person. To me, that's sacred. It's an investment of your time with them, and I don't want that to be disrupted. Who knows what that disruption will do to that process? So I would maintain that as being sacred. And by the way, when we get back there a little bit later to nonverbal feedback that you and I give each other, you ever thought about how much we give each other nonverbal, and sometimes verbal, but particularly nonverbal, about how we sit and where we are? You know, we all know what this message, broken arm or not, we all know what this message is supposed to communicate to people. Or seated in a chair, particularly if we're open, you know, the crossed leg example. I mean, behavioral scientists tell us, you know, that I'm closed, I'm not open. That's what they'd say. To me, kind of closing in myself to communication. There's a guy named Jim Bainey who's VP of Student Affairs at Colorado State. And this guy has the most interesting approach to this. And believe it or not, this guy's not off the wall completely. I mean, he's a pretty logical person. He's got some interesting ideas about distance and space. And his belief is, in how he approaches this, he feels like your standard desk or conference table is pretty overwhelming if you're the employee coming in, particularly the younger, newer employee. So he has a horseshoe type conference table in which he and that person sit in the horseshoe. I mean, this guy believes it strongly enough that he says how you position yourself and where you do with that person tells that person something about you and that environment. Now, you may be saying to me, well, hey, sure, I want to remind them who's boss. Makes sense. Do you think they don't know who's boss when they come in there? Who's going to decide their pay raise? Do you think you need to lay it on? I doubt that most of you do if you're effective supervisors. You might want to do something to be sure that the environment's as positive as you can. So for me, of course, my desk is so cluttered they couldn't see me behind my desk. So of course, obviously, I don't sit behind my desk when I evaluate a person. But I've got a little seating area in my office in which there's a small coffee table and a 2-seater chair and 2 single-seaters. We gather over there somewhere, me and this person. That's where we gather. Now, I didn't come as the prophet. I don't have all the answers to this, and I'm not the best person at this either, for that matter. But I am saying I'm going to be more effective, I think, if I get out from behind the desk and over here in some little setting, and I've got the paperwork there with me, and we get into it. I believe that. Your style might be different, and maybe the person will respond to you okay. But I'd suggest sit behind the formal desk, which is where you do your work. That might be a little overwhelming to some people. Might be a little bit of a barrier. C, review pertinent background information, personal records, performances, position questionnaires. I said when I moved over here, didn't I, that I'm going to carry my stuff with me. Rather than I get into it and say, oh, by the way, I want to pull out your 90 appraisal. And just say I'll be right back, and I'm over there for 12 minutes trying to find that in the file. Or remember those goals we set for the year? Pardon, let me over and get those. Now, what am I telling that guy? Did I prepare for this session or not? I need to have those things together in a folder over here or wherever I'm going and pull them all out together. If I'm organized. So, folks, I'm telling you, I'm spending an hour with that person, right? What do you think I should spend in preparation for that session with that character? What do you think? Hour? Equal time maybe? I don't know what it is for you. I'm not sure I can tell you this any exact amount for me, but I am saying if you spent 10 minutes getting ready for it, you haven't spent enough. I'm telling you that. Maybe you can do it fully in 30 minutes or an hour in advance. But respect that person for who they are and the importance of that moment or hour with them is pretty critical in terms of your rapport, your relationship with them. D, decide what to accomplish in the session and have clearly in mind the performance criteria, your reason for giving the rating, and the improvement needed. You need to be goal-oriented, you need to know where you're headed, you know where you'd like to be when the session is over, and certainly that you're clear with that person by the wrap-up time. Consider the employee's point of view, and maybe even anticipate what they might say. If you're going to reprimand them on something, what might they say, or what might their response be, and how will you deal with that? Be ready to change perceptions a little bit, at least have some understanding, maybe not agreement, but understanding with that person, and realize each person will respond differently. Have your opening statement well prepared to launch the discussion. I've gotten to the point, I don't rehearse this at home in my bathroom or in front of the mirror or necessarily in my office verbally, but I do know what my first paragraph pretty much is going to be with that person when they come in. Because I don't want to give them any false messages early. I want to give them some genuine feedback, and that better include for me some positive, and that's really important. So I'm going to note things like the importance they've played in helping our department reach the goals this year, if they have. Am I going to say that if they haven't? No, I better not put that in there early because I'm giving them a false message, and so forth. So I'm going to have you a paragraph that's fairly well defined. I'm not going to read it, but I'm going to have keywords in my mind that I'm going to lay on them as we get started. I'm going to definitely include positive feedback. And Tom, when we get to this section in a minute on the skeptical person, the person not doing very well, again, I'm going to say, even the person who's not doing very well, if you're back to putting them on probation or are canning them, if you're not careful, if you think that may happen, do you think they should get anything positive from you in that session? They have some value and worth that says, give me something good? Sure they do. So whether they're superb and you're going to find positives or whether they're struggling, I'm saying that opening statement should include some components. And short of people that are highly unethical or dishonest, surely that person you can find something good to say about. And if not, you're right, they shouldn't be on the payroll. Somebody ought to ask maybe why you hired them or why you kept them on this long. G, be in a good frame of mind. If you're angry or upset, delay the session at a more appropriate time. One of the reasons that John and I kind of close whistle and missed our lunch with a few of you all today was that just as I'm at the office, I had a meeting run close this morning, just as I finished, and I'm in the office, and he and I are about to go out the door, a real valued employee of mine comes in the door in tears, really struggling. Good person, great lady. I've learned a lot from her. And very disturbed. Now my gut level was to say, I need to get over there and have lunch with Dooley and Clan over there and Dana and Sharon. I promised we were going to do this. However, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do that then at that moment in time. I couldn't. And you've been there. I'm not giving you anything new about dealing with people. And so we spent another 15 minutes trying to get to the point for tonight. When I arrive back on the scene, we can maybe go from there. Well, at that moment, I wasn't probably in the greatest mood or frame of mind to have evaluated somebody, nor certainly was she. And if there would have been if I wasn't coming to Okmulgee, but in fact I had an 11 o'clock appraisal of an employee, I'd be careful before I reschedule it. But if that had been disruptive enough to what was going on in the flow of the office or from me, then I might delay that. That's the only way I would do that. Normally, I would never reschedule that. It's a sacred time, like I said. But if things were upset enough in the environment, I might consider doing that. You need to know yourself whether you make that judgment. Lastly, have the necessary forms of factual information. I made some reference to that already. So the how-tos, the launching, and the successful performance appraisal partially are contained there. What other tips or insights would you say? And this doesn't have to be formal with forms. But what do you know about trying to give people some feedback or direction? What's important about preparation and launching into giving people a message you want them to hear. What do you know about human nature and yourself? What else do you do like this or different? What else would you add to this list?
Like the evaluator must have a good attitude.
All right, tell me more. What are you thinking when you say good attitude?
Like when an employee comes in and says, well, we gotta get this over with this time of year, you know.
Yeah.
From the
All right.
outside, the employee, you're giving feedback to the employee that this doesn't mean anything.
Okay. It's like, hey, Fred, it's pain and suffering time. Let's sit this down and get it over with. I'm sure nobody's ever told you that it's evaluated you. But you got a good point. What you say does mean a lot to that person. And let's not forget who's in the supervisory role here. Do you think they have some professional expectations of you? Sure they do. So how you set the tone in the climate, is that important? Does that give a message? Sure. So if you're laissez-faire about it, or you say, hey, don't look for me, and I'm going to fill out these other things as we go along. Now, how serious do they think you are about it, their appraisal? And yet this might have something to do with promotions or salary increases or whatever. We owe a professional frame of mind, a professional environment. And to me, sometimes that's thinking about it, make sure I'm in the right frame of mind, maybe rehearsing what I'm going to launch into it with. I appreciate your comment. A good attitude about that. It begins with feeling good about the process. And folks, again, from Sharon's and my discussion, I don't know a great deal yet about how far y'all have gotten, other than the forms are available and you're launching it this year. But what I'm trying to say is that, hey, it's OSU Okmulgee's instrument, isn't it? It's documentation that you all are utilizing to serve your students best, isn't it? So if it's not working or isn't right, I hope there's a mechanism by which changes can be made over time. What am I saying? I'm saying invest your time into what we've got until you can improve it or make it better, and then be a part of the process so that you can have a good attitude about feeling that it's worthwhile. It's a pretty important time for that person on the receiving end. Don't ever underestimate that, even though you have to do 6 or 8 or 9 of them. Don't sell that short. It's pretty critical. Tom Dooley, just for you and all of us, how to conduct the appraisal for the person who's A, not doing a good job, or who is skeptical. Get it's in your handout. And I've read that there's some similarities that go to these two types of people. Remember, I'm talking about a person who's not getting the job done satisfactorily, or who's a skeptical. Many times a new employee is skeptical about this process, feeling like, ooh, this is permanent on my employee record. The skeptic's that way sometimes. Or come from an environment that this is foreign to. They've been in industry and or in commercial business. All they've ever heard is, hey, you're doing good, bad, here's your pay raise, or you're out, or something. And now they're in an environment that's a little different. This tries to speak to these issues with people like that. And probably you and I are people like that in some way. I think there are 15 key points I want to briefly stress. Remember, keep in mind who we're talking about now. The employee who's not doing good or who's a skeptic. A, compliment the employee without going overboard. Failure to recognize good performance may leave a what's the use attitude. However, overdoing will raise questions about your sincerity. Everybody wants to have a positive self-regard in their work. I just don't think you and I hire people that want to fail. Not intentionally. Do we hire them at least? Or do you hire them? And therefore, I think we've got to find out what's good in people and reinforce that by calling their hand at what they're not doing well. And I think those aren't mutually exclusive. I mean, you got an hour with them if that's what we're doing. Can you not say to them, you're doing lousy here, but you're doing great here in your example? But isn't that tough for us as real life humans? It is for me. I've had to practice and work at that, and I've got a ways to go. But that's what we're saying they need to hear then, that message. Here's where you're doing lousy, and here's particulars, and here's where you're a great citizen, or here's where you're getting better, and I've seen progress this year. Everybody needs some good self-regard, and I hope you can find that in this person who's not doing well. Make your criticism constructive, and if you're going to point out a weakness, be sure you can indicate where they need to, or what they can do about correcting it. If your facilities guy gave you the wrong information on the new Refrigeration Act, Federal Refrigeration Act, don't hold him accountable yet for something he doesn't even know about in that evaluation. Say, hey, Fred, you need help, and because I need help. So we're going to get you trained in this refrigeration area. Then, Fred, I'm going to hold you accountable to guide me and us in policy. Help him find a way to get that solved. Clarify the reasons why the rating was given, citing specific examples of performance. Do not get sucked into that often vulnerable characteristic that we as humans have of hearsay or secondary information. I'm telling you, 8 out of 10 times it'll cost you with that person. You will sever a relationship, you'll strain a relationship because what somebody said and was their perception. Be careful, which means you as a supervisor need to be in touch with them enough. Is other data from other people of value? Yes. Can it be utilized to a degree? Yes. But be careful that you are getting specific with somebody else's data rather than your own. They don't want conclusions reached by somebody else who may have different motives or reasons to interact. Use what you've acquired over time. And remember, somebody appointed you and put you at this salaried level over somebody if you're a supervisor because they thought you were a person who could do that, right? So that does mean staying in touch with that person, working with them, developing insight about what they are or aren't accomplishing. Expectations, D. They need to know what those are. Okay? And I've had this happen. I've definitely had this happen. Second part of that. Occasionally, the employee's not doing what you expect. That individual may be confused and actually believe he or she is doing what is expected. I don't know if you've ever faced that in your work career, but on occasion, not on major responsibilities as likely, but I have had people think that they're right on the train, helping us get there. And in fact, they were going in the opposite direction on the counter train. I don't know if you've ever been there or experienced that, but it does happen, I'm telling you, with people. And you know when it happens? It happens particularly when you and I failed right there, when we weren't clear enough on expectations. So we start with that, and then we can hold them accountable, but there needs to be interaction to be sure they're on the right goal train, with you and me. Ask questions and listen. E, you may begin to realize some of the reasons for how they are or aren't performing. I mentioned a while ago several personal examples that can influence their performance. Any of you ever worked around an employee who you thought was superb, sparkling, and all of a sudden they weren't? You ever been around somebody like that? Well, you ever ask why? Why would that happen? All sort of reasons, personally, maybe professionally, but if you've got the ability to observe that, then you've got the ability to get some more insight about what you can do to help them get back to being a superb employee. I can't believe that's mutually exclusive. I have to think that if they've been there once, even if they change jobs, sure they can maybe not be superb again in this other job, maybe it's not their character or nature as much, but sure they got some of those characteristics which you can help elevate them. So if you can find those observations, then you can do something about it positively, I believe. In this session, don't interrupt, but don't let irrelevant topics drag out the discussion. There's an old saying that the best defense is a good offense. You know what I'm saying? The best defense is a good offense. If Amjad's evaluating me and he's saying, Kent, in this area you're not doing real well, well, one way I might try either consciously or some people unconsciously to divert this discussion is to somehow change the topic, elaborate extensively, or maybe I'll say, but yeah, Amjad, the reason I'm not real good in that area is because, and you know what I'm trying to do? I'm going to put it back in his lap. He's my supervisor. If he's a good supervisor, I wouldn't be doing that. I mean, I'm playing a middle game. That's what I'm doing. You need to be sensitive to the fact that some people can't face responsibility squarely like that and need to continually be brought back to that. You're not effective as a supervisor probably if you let that session end with them convincing you it was your fault, your obligation. Now, may have been some truth to that, but overall it's their duty, as you and I know, so don't let them conveniently hand the football back to you to carry. Let's see, who's the boss of me? Who's in charge of me as the employee? Well, I'm supposed to be responsible for my actions, so you hold them accountable that way. And don't, while you don't want to interrupt so much they can't get a word in, don't let them over-elaborate or don't let them shift their emphasis from themselves to yourself or another person. Oh, that's great. Third party. Let's pull in Sarah Smith. Let's make her the guilty party. Well, you need to deal with Sarah on those issues later, maybe, but not here today. G, ask the employee for suggestions on how his or her performance can be improved. Use this opportunity to guide in improving future job performance. And remember, I'm working under the auspice here that 9 out of 10 people or higher want to succeed in their job. I don't think people normally come to the payroll to be fired or to be laid off or to have grief and misery for themselves, much less use a supervisor. I believe most people want to do reasonably well in their work. Reasonably well. So wouldn't it make some sense that if you could find out for them what they could do to get better or how they could improve, that would make some sense in applying that as a prescription to them getting better as an employee? Wouldn't that make some sense maybe? I think what I'm suggesting there is draw out of them what they can do to improve, how they can go about improving, and then folks, as they're identifying that, and as you help them define that more, make that a part of an action plan or accountability model. Don't let them escape it. They just told you that. Make that a part of an action plan to where they need more education, more training. They need more help from staff or whatever. Hold them to that. They've helped volunteering. They should know something about what their liabilities are. H, keep the appraisal job centered and avoid discussion of personality shortcomings unless they adversely affect departmental operations and the employee's job performance. You're almost always going to lose on personality issues, and of course you should, because we don't hire people just on personality, though that is an element. But you know, remember who you and I have to answer to on the day the judge comes, I guess, on this issue of if we're in court. We're not going to get wrestle with personality issues. We're going to have to wrestle with what did you tell them their job was and how are they doing it. Not do they sing in the church choir with you or something. The bottom line is how are they doing their job that you spelled out for them. Now the point I'm trying to get at here is as this appraisal needs to be job centered, you can't get sucked in again to a personality rub or that example you used earlier that oh, this person tends to be dominating. If you're going to use that word, back it up with particulars that you think are credible, but don't hang on to them some personality label. Like, gosh, you're a highly anxious person. Why is that? Better get specific if you're going to help them. And remember, my point here is I'm assuming you're motivated to help them get better. But don't hang it out there to dry and move on to something else. Don't get caught on personality issues. And folks, I would say here, if you have a problem that is personality oriented with your supervisor, first recognize it and acknowledge it. And secondly, I would probably look with the right person or persons towards how I might best remedy that, as well as with that supervisor, him or herself. I'd work on trying to improve on that, in other words. And finally, I guess what I'm thinking here, bottom line, is if you think that rub is too great to be objective, remember your job here, you're the supervisor, is to be objective and fair, okay, not subjective, because that could cost somebody a pay raise or a job or a promotion. If you can't be objective, I think you need to talk to your supervisor about how to approach it with this person. Maybe that person needs to help you do it. Maybe that person needs to do it so you can overcome it. Okay, the analogy I would use, one of the fun things that I've got to do over the years is coordinate student disciplinary issues on our campus, for people who live on campus. And a tough lesson I learned a long time ago was, Ken, if you can't stay objective with that student in your office about what they did wrong, don't expect them to A, respect you probably, or B, respond to you. And I'll never forget the time that I had this young man in my office who I knew had done some vandalism and damage in one of our buildings. But I couldn't prove it to him, but I knew I had witnesses that could prove it. But I was also, at that moment, trying to protect their innocence on this deal due to some threat to them and some threat that already occurred. So I made the mistake of getting angry with this guy in this disciplinary hearing and trying to use the autocratic model of, hey, I am above you because I'm the administrator, you're the lowly student. I didn't say that, but my actions sure conveyed that. And the point I'd make is, since I was wanting him to hold him financial responsibility, and also I'd like him to grow up, learn a little bit, when I got angry because of how I didn't manage my emotions very well, you think I compromised my effectiveness with him that moment? I really did. I know I did. You don't because you weren't there, but I know I did because I emotionally let him get to me. I wasn't objective. And the analogy that I'm using with that example is, of course, that person, if you have a rub or difference with, you're human in it, and so am I, but you can't let them get to you, if you would use that rough analogy, to the point that you lose your effectiveness. You're going to have to shut down that day, or even if you don't shut down psychologically, you both may have shut down because of the emotion at that moment. Now, this isn't an expose on lack of emotion. I think some of the best supervisors I know carry an emotional level or edge that's in the right balance, because they reinforce what they say with what they do. You know, they say, but hey, I told you to do this, it's important. The job description, by the way, says that. Remember that? But where they also carry an emotion of genuineness and care that they get it done, sometimes hinging on, hey, you're looking to make yourself look bad, you're making us look bad. Emotion has a role and a place, but it's got to be under control, or you can get compromised. I'm going to pause a second before we jump to that last 7. Questions or comments on this first half? Most of this, I think, to you and me is pretty commonsensical. That's why Sherry's going to be wondering, why the hell this guy come all the way over in Stillwater? You could sit down and figure this out yourself. Most of this makes a lot of sense. And sometimes I think it's employing what we really know into what we do in a scheme and planning and thinking things out. So look at the last 7 of these on conducting performance appraisal with that person. Still a person who's skeptical, person who is not doing a good job. Don't show anger or hostility. I just mentioned emotions, regardless of remarks that may be made, maintain objectivity. Probably doesn't need to be clarified either. Set it up on that. If they get angry, listen. Don't expect to convince them of anything while they're angry. Do you generally agree with that? Are you effective when you're angry with other people, and are they with you? There are, I think, a lot of exceptions to that statement. But you need to know, remember, what's the reason for the get-together? The get-together is to tell them how they're doing their job now and what they need to do for the future. And the degree to which anger in that person now is dysfunctional, needs to be recognized. That might be a reason to call a halt to the session, might be. Though it might be a reason to keep it going to work through that too. But recognize that emotion and respect it and see if it's going to interfere with the process or not. Allow them to maintain self-respect. I want to say again, I said a while ago, now there's no question when you two get together who's supervisor, right? Somebody's designated that. Somebody's in charge. Somebody's the boss. So do you think you have to tell them that? You need to say, hey, remember, Dr. Cloud just said, I'm really over you in the chart. Don't forget that now. Now, have they figured that out? I imagine they have. So my thought here is don't demean them to elevate yourself. I hope you have confidence enough in yourself in that position that what you're trying to say is you need to get better for these reasons to get this job done, so we're better at serving students in this department or area. But don't do that issue of being the one-upsman, that I need to come out ahead. People, I'm telling you, they're intelligent folks, that guy or lady sitting across the table from you. They know who's in charge. You just don't need to browbeat them on that. That's going to cost you with them, if not there, because they know who's in charge later, in other ways, in relationships, possibly. With this person who's not doing very well or skeptical, try to maintain some presence of compassion, not being so hard-nosed that you don't hear this, maybe this emotional tone that tells you what they're struggling with. Try not to be so organizationally focused that you lose the individual in that process, I guess, is part of what I'm saying. I'm now moving towards what I call turning the corner with L, M, N, and O. In these 4 elements, you have got to be sure. Hey, if you've done everything that you've done up to them for now and you stop, you think that if you don't go on with these next 4, and you may or may not have read them, you've given them a score by now, probably, you've sent them off. You give them any plan or way in which they can improve or enhance themselves along the way. You really, gosh, you're kind of like a surgeon who just got started and then decided to leave about 3/4 of the way of soil and back up and said, I've got a golf match. We'll see you later. Hang in there and do your best. What you've got to do is now link L, M, N, and O in a plan of action. What you're going to do, completing the surgery, if you would, and completing the correction. L, develop and obtain commitment on specific steps for positive action, schedules for follow-up, write them down. You bet I'd write them down. If I'm going to tell a person that you need more training in this area, and I'm going to help fund you to do that. And also, we're too far apart on this stuff. We're going to start meeting once every 3rd week, get it on our calendar. I'm going to write that down, and I'm going to send it to him or her and say, this is what we're going to be doing. Remember we agreed to that, or I said we needed to do that since I'm the boss. I can get by with that. We're going to do that. Write those things down, a plan of action. Because if I send this person off, remember, it's the skeptic or the person not doing a good job. Have I helped them turn the corner? Then you get back to, well, do I want them to make it or not? Would I rather than really fail or than succeed? Maybe it lies in there in terms of what my motive is to take them the next step. M, show a willingness to support and assist in changes. I will meet with you regularly. We will get you some more training. I will lead you out to that other operational campus for a month or have an exchange with that campus to help you acquire those skills. You need them and we need them. Our department needs those. Schedule a follow-up session if necessary. Don't hesitate to do that. Remember who we're talking about, the skeptic or the person not doing well. You may need a follow-up session with him or her to briefly highlight this session or to start stage 2 of this transaction with that person who's employed. In the session, on a friendly, constructive note. I like to, when I start it and when I end it, have been sure as best I can the person feels reasonably good about who they are, even if they don't feel great about what they're doing as an employee. So if I can find something good about where they've been, you know, they've done some good things for our department, or gosh, you helped us in the staff softball tournament that we had, staff beat the faculty and you were the star of the team, and you're not doing great over here on accountability right now, that's going to have to improve, but I appreciate you contributing to the morale of the group, and that does count to me for something. It's not what you were hired for, what you get paid for primarily on the softball team, by the way, but I do appreciate who you are in terms of staff morale. Find those things that are of value and reinforce them with those people. Before we get to the after session, I've shared 15 or so ideas or thoughts there about that person who's skeptical or not doing a good job. What have you found in your experience? You know, I'm not trying to, I'm only the facilitator here today. I don't have all the answers. How would you add to this list, or what have you found in your experience? What gets people's, now here we're talking about this type of person. What gets good results out of them, and what's dysfunctional? What causes problems? Your turn. I will get a drink while you're answering this question. Somebody talk to me. Tell me about it. Maybe on the negatives, knowing yourself. What's gotten you in trouble? It doesn't have to be just in an appraisal, but in a time when you're dealing with a person, what's gotten you in trouble with people? What gets you in trouble with people? Saying what's on your mind instead of your heart?
There again, I believe it goes back to the attitude of the administration, and all of us will be in administration.
Okay.
You know, if someone's going to be skeptical, it's because someone has said something to them that they perceive as negative.
All right.
Maybe like, if you don't like this job, you can leave and go find another.
Okay.
And I know that's been said.
So part of the problem could be the environment that they find themselves in, what they've been told, that they're not valued.
Because of the administration being skeptical, the attitude.
Okay, so if you don't like it, you can lump it. So that sets in the climate, environment, okay? What are some other reasons that you can face that?
The other thing is if the employee feels as though he's gone through that process, that whole process, and has done over it, he doesn't see the results of it or any feedback. I mean, from the standpoint that you promise him something or you're going to do something and you don't come across, or the institution doesn't come across.
Okay. And I appreciate that a lot. Folks as supervisors, we got to be careful about what we say we can and will deliver on and what we don't. In other words, I hope as a good supervisor, you try to support your people, not blindly, but hopefully you try to support your people. But it's a little bit like, to me, let's say my vice president is the only person who can suspend a student from our institution. Let's just say that. But one day I tell a student in my office, you shouldn't have done that, and you're going to be suspended. You're out of here. Now, I already told you who could make that decision, but I promised something that I can't deliver on. And folks, I'm telling you, you don't want to promise as it relates to employees or benefits or training. And I tell you, I don't think the future is real bright on this point as it relates to benefits, salary increases, perquisites. And that is, though Oklahoma's made some big strides with House Bill 1017, perhaps, at the common school level, and that's had some impact on us in higher ed. You know, one of the typical things of legislators, and probably some of you are married to one, so I'll be careful here, is a lot of good packages and things are done, but they're not always financed or funded fully. And one of my concerns about us today and our jobs in the future is our capability to have resources to do everything that we want. We're not going to have, we don't have now. You don't have it here at Okmulgee, we don't at Stillwater. And therefore, suggesting or saying we can do things for people like, oh, I'll get you a salary increase or job promotion or something that I can't deliver on could be fatal. I mean, it might be fatal if this guy takes it that way and I said I'm going to do it and I don't. It might cost me my life. probably it's going to be a fatal in my relationship and rapport. I appreciate, part of your point I'm picking up on and saying, as a supervisor, I better not promise something I can't deliver on. And salaries and benefits are just one of them. There are a lot of other things. Maybe more important than those to the established person is how I'm treated. And you just used the word feedback. The person who gets out of that session or environment without feedback thinks, well, that was pretty bland. Well, I just got treated vanilla today. Why didn't I get a flavor out of this deal? That's a good question. And I'm worried that the more we occupy ourselves with salaries and promotions only, there's a lot of movement in higher education institutions, but there's also a lot of people who aren't moving. The more we worry about those two issues only and forget the value of other intrinsic ways to help the person, the more we may have some employee issues, problems, rebellions, or if we can't manage those other sides. Because I don't know about you guys, but at our place in Stillwater, I'm not sure exactly what sort of plan that you all dealt with here in salary wage, but in our case, and I think very justifiably given where we are budget-wise, there were some people who got increases, really needy people at the entry wage level. And I think our institution made an important commitment, dedication. We're going to raise the starting or entry wage of a lot of people in certain positions. Now that meant the old compression things had closed. All of a sudden, gosh, I've been here 6 years and I'm only $1 an hour or 47 cents an hour different than this rookie. Those things contribute to employee morale. I think the point I'm trying to make is that's an example of some of the issues that I think are going to make our jobs as supervisors increasingly tough. Part of what I'm saying is I need to be creative enough to figure out other ways besides, or in addition to dollars and promotions, to get something out of my people. And I don't mean that in a manipulative way. But I need to figure out, how do I satisfy them? How do I help them? And how do they help me? I may have the same problem. I've said too much on that. I appreciate your comment. What have you done? Yeah, Larry?
About a 5-minute timeout.
That sounds good. You ready to do it now?
Sure.
One suggested kind of appraisal of your appraisal might be these 7 test questions. To kind of get a reading to see how you feel like you did and how well you responded to the concerns that you had towards this individual, employee. Is after number 3 on that particular page of your handout, after the session, ask yourself these following questions. If you can honestly answer yes to each of them, you probably score pretty well. You probably fare pretty well as an appraisal individual. Does the employee know where he or she stands? If you send them away in an ambiguous state, confused, unsure, and you have to answer no to that, you haven't helped them very much. They need to have some definition. Can you send them away and they know pretty well where they stand with you? Hey, if you ranked on number 2, if you ranked an employee extremely high, they probably aren't going to worry as much about that. But if you ranked them low, they need to know why they're at that particular location and rating. I tell you, in our scale in Stillwater, we have on our instrument, we have 5 elements, and they go this way. Special merit, good, needs improvement, or unsatisfactory. Those 5. Now, in my way of thinking, folks, if I've got anybody that needs improvement or unsatisfactory, the lower tier of that 5-point scale, I'm obligated to be sure they understand pretty clearly why they're there. It's great if on those upper 3 scales, good, merit, and special merit, they know. Hopefully they have as we've talked. But they should understand why I'm telling them they need improvement or unsatisfactory, because those are elements which constitute things like probation, termination, things like that. And you can guess what I'm hitting at. If I've got a person in those categories, I'd better be ready to give them their knowledge and advance information well enough so that if it comes to saying, sorry, Charlie, you are effective now due to these lack of performances. You're on a 90-day or 6-month probation. I better be able to justify then to him again and somebody else in writing why he's on probation. And if you think that's important, think about that next step. I'm going to can Charlie. You think I'd better be able to make my case stand there? I really had. Or me and my personnel officer and somebody else, or university attorney, may wind up in court on that one. And I'm not, what bothers me these days about some of these issues is that there are times where people do try to take advantage of good people with well-intended efforts who are supervisors. But to me, that's more of a reason if you have even one person that would take advantage of you, be sure your paper trail is clean and you got your act together. You may only have one of 100 employees who will try to nab you in court or someplace. But that not only would developmentally be better to help that person and everybody else to understand why and where, it would also save you a lot of heartache later on. If you really want to can them and you don't have a paper trail, you're going to be compromised. How would you like to have somebody on your payroll the rest of your career that you just fired? Not a real inviting feeling, is it? People have had that. People have had that. So do they know what must be done to improve upon the work performance? This is turning the corner about the importance of things that they can do to be better employees for you. Are they motivated to improve? If you've had them any time, if you've had them a year or longer, you ought to know to some degree what motivates them. To some degree. Now, you don't have to be a psychologist in this job, though sometimes it sure would help, I think. Might get you in trouble too. But you need to know what does motivate them to help them tick to a degree, in addition to the basics of salary, wages, and benefits. What else thrives for them to do well? Can you identify those and help to find ways to improve them? And folks, now taking back to the question Tom raised to me earlier on 5, does he or she know what habit for improvement follows? Now, you told them they need to do or be working on these things. Here's a plan of action. Do they know what might happen? For example, hey, you're in the needs improvement category, but did you know that if you don't do these things, you would fall properly and unsatisfactory? And that means your services may no longer be needed. You just need to know that. Now, I don't think most of us that's easy to say, if we're real honest. Unsatisfactory, like meaning we don't want you around, type of thing. So you better know that you communicate those messages to them in a plan and where they stand. Excuse me. And again, for paper trail records, you'd be able to show that you did say that. It'd just be wise to be able to say that you can prove that. Pretty negative side of the coin for a minute, but those are the things of which court issues and ambiguities come from, and sometimes good people, supervisors, get compromised because they didn't have the support, the paper trail, the paper test. Are plans for on-the-job follow-up clear? And have you built a stronger relationship between that person and yourself? A goal for me, folks, would be number 7. Maybe a little idealistic, but I think I would hope that through our appraisal process, remember I said it includes formative, ongoing, and summative, the cumulative part, that those evaluation efforts ongoing would strengthen our relationship. I mean, think about this for a second. Every one of us in the room have about 24 hours a day to do whatever it is in life we're going to do. And for many of us, a third of that day is spent in our occupational endeavor, 8 hours, give or take a little bit. A third of our day. Now, does it make much sense to do things and find yourself in a position in which that 1/3 is lousy, is harmful to me and others, is stuff that makes me not sleep at night or beat my kids or something? I mean, what I'm getting at is if I don't have the capability to, with people over time, try to strengthen that employee-employer relationship and to make it a better place for me and that person, part of that 8 hours a day, that third of the day that I've got to work with is kind of futile. That's the contention I think I've set before you is I don't go through the motion to do these things just for fun. I mean, it is a paycheck that feeds my family, but I need to think that I'm going somewhere with my life and my job, don't I? And if I don't feel that way with myself and my employees, I'm kind of compromising those 8 hours a day, that work time of my life, the vocational time. So a reasonable goal, I think, is to try to strengthen those relationships with that person. So answering yes to those 7 test questions, I think, can be important to see how you're doing. Very briefly, got some elements in which you just need to know yourself, called appraisal pitfalls. Being human, you and I have certain tendencies to deal with certain people in certain ways, and it's a good idea to recognize some of them. Some of the pitfalls, some of the ways that you and I will stumble. Number 1, the so-called carryover effect. Did you know that some of us have a tendency to rate a person high or low in several areas because they rate high or low in one area? Sounds kind of subjective to me, but human nature, being as it is that because a person maybe is low in one area, sometimes we will pull that person down in other areas. And that is subjective. We've got to have a capacity to look at a person on some scale or dimension and evaluate those independently to a degree, and then to interdependently put those back together. So you should just know, some of us tend to, because a person was low here, put persons low in all those categories. That's a mistake, and it's very subjective. You need to know that about yourself as you deal with people. I love these two. Leniency, consistent leniency and consistent severity. On the leniency, self-descriptive, why, hey, everybody on my team's a great citizen. They're always prompt, they do their job, they're responsive, get the reports in on time. And so, by golly, I'm not going to discriminate or differentiate at all. I'm going to say they're all merit people. Good citizens all. They're right there together. Now, I guess I don't have any problem with that if they're really all merit people in your judgment versus you're doing it because that's the easy thing to do and because I'm going to tell Larry he's a merit because I know that he and Ken might talk and I wouldn't want Ken not to get a merit if Larry got a merit and Ken's got a good and they make that a source of debate. If I do it for those types of reasons, then I'm compromising. If indeed they're not both merit. And some of us may have a tendency to not be able to handle that heat in that kitchen sometimes and saying, I do need to discern, if I can, different people's levels of performance. They're both merits, that's where they need to be. But I just need to be sure that I don't treat everybody so easily that I don't discern. And any of you ever worked for anybody who deals with it from a consistent severity point of view? A person who's always too tough on everybody, a person who says there are no 10s in life on a scale of 1 to 10. You just don't get there. Anybody ever deal with that? Worked for a fellow one time who, on our 5-point appraisal that I mentioned a while ago of merit and special merit, his philosophy was simply that that I don't have special merit people. Merit and good people, but no special merit. Now, philosophically, my only problem with that is it because you don't have or because you won't recognize them? And also, how do you know, since there are going to be new people coming into your organization in the future, that you don't have special merit or won't have them? Some people just think, quote, the old school way is to kind of hold people down. Don't give them too much good news. Don't reinforce them. Don't make them feel too good. Be tough on them. Make them meet your expectations. And there's some real validity in that to a degree. But the degree to which you think nobody can excel or exceed, again, is not probably dealing with individuals independently as you and I need to. Central tendency. Some of your old stat classes experience will remind you of this one. It relates to the supervisor who won't stick his or her neck out. Well, everybody in my crew's a pretty good person. Again, I don't want to discern between them. So I better be careful about putting merit. So I'm just going to put them middle of the scale, good, right in the center, clump them all together. Don't misunderstand me. If that's where they belong, put them there. But if there are ways that they need to be discerned between, your job, your obligation now, and mine as a supervisor is to be able to distinguish. That goes back to telling me I need to have done my homework to discern if a person's merit or good or whatever distinction I might make. Folks, fifthly, you and I need to know enough about ourselves and our abilities to know that we think and act prejudicially with some people. I think first we need to understand that that's sometimes a human shortcoming that some of us have on some points with some people. And to face it and deal with it rather than to deny it and say, it didn't happen to me. That begins the point of overcoming that. I'm saying sometimes you and I may treat classes, types, individuals, groups differently than others. As supervisors, are we allowed to do that? Not only legally, which is pretty secondary to me on this point, ethically, we know what we're supposed to do. But I'm saying humanly, you and I have that problem, shortcoming sometimes. I'm saying, I'm not lecturing to you or me and saying, well, Kent, you're prejudicial, so you should lose your job. Hey, there's a lot more to being a job, doing good a job than whether or not you're prejudiced. But a part of being a good supervisor is overcoming my prejudicial tendencies, my tendency to treat people as groups rather than individuals, rather as one. So you need to know yourself. I say, do I tend to do that? I mean, do I treat women this way for some reason, my upbringing, or do I tend to treat another group or population this way? You just need to know that about you, and therefore be willing to do something about it. Okay? Day-to-day variation of point of view, I've always found is kind of interesting. And on your point a few times about attitude, the attitude or framework that you come into this session, did you know that could cause your appraisal of that person to be a little bit different from one month to the next? You just need to recognize that. In other words, you might have given a person on a few parts of the scale a high rating in one part of the month, and then maybe the next month or 6 months later you might give them more average. That's human nature. You just need to know that about yourself, that sometimes we tend to have a variation. Over time now, if you're in touch with your employer, you shouldn't have a lot of dissonance there. But there could be a slight amount. You need to recognize that, to be aware of that, is what I would think. Role conflict and ambiguity, which results in low effort. Here, each employee must know, are my eyes fading out or is this blurred? Each employee must know the scope of his or her responsibilities as well as clear expectations in following the reporting relationships within the organization of the group. Folks, you've really not done them a service if they leave confused or ambiguous on this. It's all great. So as you're asking yourself those 7 questions we just finished, you need to recognize, if I've left them confused and not sure of their role, or I've opened up another dimension and said, what if, or wouldn't it be nice? I tell you, one of my great thieves in life and society are those people who are the what if people. Some of you great teachers in this room are going to fight me on this. The what if people, but who sometimes don't well enough help that person to get to closure. Now, education is making me think on my own, stimulating me for sure. But sometimes in the appraisal, I need to be sure that they do get to closure on some things. Don't leave everything what if. If I see the guy out and say, well, what if you did these additional things in your job this year? We changed your job description. I raise that question. And we move on. And later the guy thinks, he said, what if, did he mean do that? Or would it be nice if I rewrote my job description to include that? Or was that just a speculation for the future? That's what I mean by what's wrong with what is, if you don't help that person reach closure. Because remember, we're talking about their livelihood and their performance in your team, your organization, your institution. Recency, just a note that you should be in contact with. Performance level just prior to the time of the appraisal should not be the only consideration. So, for example, Tom had seen me 3 days before the appraisal, and he and I had a big budget debate, discussion, and I left there and he did upset. We disagreed. And 3 days later was my appraisal. He's going to evaluate me. It's very important that he and I both know, particularly him if he's my supervisor, hey, so we disagreed. We both, remember, we know who's the boss, but we disagreed. It's important, based upon how that disagreement was determined, that 3 days later, the recency of that experience doesn't cost me points, unless it should. If I walk in, if I slug Tom and call him an SOB and roll out the door, that probably ought to cost me, a lot. But if we just disagreed on this philosophically, and unless I'm highly disrespectful or do something insubordinate to my supervisor, he also has no right to hold that against me, if you would, 3 days later because we disagree. Just being careful that recency carryover can influence us. Just need to be in touch with that. Proximity, the rating of surrounding items may influence the rating of a single item. I don't think this comes into play a lot, but you should know that sometimes it relates a little bit to sticking your neck out too. Sometimes we waffle a little bit here, and we tend to say, well, gosh, it doesn't make sense that this guy's a 3 on all these elements up to now, and now he's an 8. I'm saying he's a decent employee, but I'm trying to say he's exceptional in this area. That could sound dissonant. Hey, if you really thought that's the case, that's probably true. So don't let the fact he's got a bunch of 3s pull his 8 down to a 5 unless that 8 should be a 5. So that's an element of the pitfalls that we sometimes run into in this area. Any other contributions about shortcomings in appraisal environments that you would encounter as you deal with giving a person feedback? Traps that you've fallen into. Tom?
Your point, G, about role conflict and ambiguity. If you're my boss, and just by your very nature, don't give clear expectations. I mean, that's just the way you are as a boss. And yet, I, as an employee, am trying to deal with performing well in my job, but frankly, I can't get clear expectations. What can I do about that?
Great question. Now remember, one of my hubs about people succeeding in their job and being helped to gets back to your point of that clear expectations. And remember, my example is my greatest frustrations and tough moments as supervisor has been when I felt that that wasn't done well. So to me, that's a core about employee problems. I'll share a couple ideas I've got, and I invite others. There's a lot of collective wisdom in this room beyond mine, so others may want to add to this. A few things that I think, if my suit wasn't giving me clear enough expectations, to me it would begin with pulling out the, and as mundane as this is going to sound initially, it would begin with me pulling out the job description and seeing, is that consistent or is there dissonance between what I'm doing or he's thinking or she's thinking I should be doing and what it says? And I would begin to get some reading on that. Hey, I'm supposed to be doing this, but I keep winding up over here in left field. There's a dissonance, for me. It would go back to the basic. If something's in writing that somebody's given you or helped develop, I would try to keep taking us back to that, cleaning that up and revising it so that I understood it more, but importantly, this person began to have to process or deal with what it is the organization, institution has said you're doing. And may well come to the realization that those two things differ and be source for more fertile ground to talk about what else should be developed. That might be one way. Going back to the basics of job description, a position questionnaire, or something like that, and making that a source of visiting. See, I think a lot of you people in this room have jobs that are so demanding that we have trouble taking the time to clarify or elaborate further on expectations due to our tremendous load we carry, and therefore we don't revisit those very often. And I think, Tom, sometimes that has to be bumped up enough, at least your perspective as an employee, to say, but this is important to me because I don't think the institution's getting their worth out of me, or that I'm frustrated, or maybe I am in the wrong job or something. I would try to hammer back to the pivotal point of a job description or a position questionnaire. I think, secondly, I would say, even if you're not this way, though you're partly suggesting that we all are this way, I think, I would say, but boss, I need a little more structure and definition that you're giving me. I'm sorry, I'll take the ball and run with it, but it seems like when we have conflict or differences is when I thought, honestly, I was generally doing what you were expecting, but you called me in and said, gee, Money Christmas, you're making us look bad, or you cost a lot of money. And you're thinking, but I thought I had that latitude. If I could get specific, that's the type of thing I'd say, hey, I'm not trying to be the local dissonant here, the person who is our dissonant here, but I really need some clarification. I would try to deal with, boss, give me more direction and feedback, or help me clean up this job description, or help to find my parameters a little bit more. I would come about it, I think, from that way. Secondly, I think, Tom, I might ask for more frequent feedback, at least of a formative nature. Say, hey, I realize, sir, ma'am, you're a busy person. I am too, you know that. But rather than just doing this once a year, how about quarterly? If we spend a religious 30 minutes, only once every 3 months, together with some instrument or some topic about my job satisfaction, what I am or am not doing to your satisfaction. In other words, getting that commitment or support to revisit that some. Maybe that would help in some cases. Other ideas? What else would y'all contribute? That's a great question. And I realize a lot of us just don't get overly emotionally charged about job descriptions and revisiting it. But I tell you, in a public institution, and when you see some of these wild, far out court cases where a student is suing an institution because they didn't get them an education, one of those types of issues out there, somebody's suing an institution because they don't have a job. Well, you guys didn't educate me, they're saying. It's y'all's fault back there. They're trying to lay that responsibility. Well, the way I'm relating that in a very rough way to our situation in understanding work relationships is you and I can stray also and not be focused on what we should be doing and be accountable to the taxpayers, if you will, or people in the state, if we're not doing the job that we were intended to do, which is written in job descriptions. And it's not the things of which people have a lot of fun bull sessions about, I know. But I do think that's the cornerstone of where we begin with jobs. What else would you add to that? Anybody else?
What about the possibilities of evaluating supervisors?
I think it's a good idea. Let me tell you how, just a suggestion. I think there are systems and ways that input needs to be gathered about how we're doing as supervisors. From the session where Tom and I are sitting here talking, and I invite that from Tom, hopefully in advance. And Tom, by the way, I would welcome some feedback about me. Some of us won't feel comfortable about that, some not. But I also think, and I realize this is more threatening to some people than others, but I also think if you really kind of want to get a reading, whether you had your math or stat department do this, or you did it with your business folks here, with a focus group in which you first of all got some data about the general department or the area in a set-down group, set with students or employees, or whether it was more of a formal survey in which people were surveyed and anonymity ensured. I think there's a place for sure for feedback about and to the supervisor. I tell you how I saw it tackled a couple years ago in one department in Stillwater with good success. And I realized there's a little risk with this for everybody. One of the things that I saw done was all employees, all full-time employees in this department, so this particular one didn't include students, all full-time employees in the department were asked to fill out this simple 2-page pencil paper form evaluating the department overall, and then specifically the 5 or 6 managerial staff members in that department. So that the overall results were compiled, and then the results for those 6 were compiled and shared only with those 6 by, again, an independent committee or person. And this department had a very good experience with that because they got an overall feel for the environment, but they also, like Larry, then would get specific feedback about me from the 7 or 8 responses or 12, whatever that I'd get, meshed together with written comments. So, I mean, granted, that can be a little threatening to me. However, with the anonymity protected, you got pretty good response and feedback from the employees. But at the same time, one of the aspects of this was the guy on the far left or far right who had it in for me, let's say, was meshed in with those others if I'm doing a reasonably good job. So the final product, plus individual written comments being shared, showed overall how people felt like I was doing. That's one approach that I feel like has some merit, that's not too threatening for anybody, and still left me as that person able to look at that and do with that and respond to that. In other words, let's say you and I are in the same department, and our employees that both evaluated you and me, I didn't see yours and you didn't see mine except the overall organizational one. But we had that to chew on and deal with. Now, we could talk about that, but it wasn't shared. In other words, I didn't get a copy of yours nor you of mine, just as one angle. I think there's some ways you can do that aren't threatening, or aren't as threatening as some other ways. That's a good question. Fair question.
Are you saying you feel it might be as important for us as supervisors to be evaluated by those under us as well as by those above us then?
I do. I think folks, I think that's going to strengthen your relationship with them. They're going to value you more, and they're going to see you as more of one who is willing to take the feedback just as you're willing to give it. I think they're going to see you as more of an open and understanding person. Remember who's in charge still, who the boss is. You'll do with that what you think appropriate. And if one day everybody was out to get you from this angle, normally you're going to be able to decipher that. But I think the opportunity and the right structure really is going to help morale of people that report to you.
Is that typical in an educational setting, such as on the main campus? Does that take place there? Evaluation by people under the
Of them. Very spotty. A lot of people religiously subscribe to it, and some wouldn't touch it. That's right. The Bill Porter study that I cited a while ago, which is 8 or 9-year-old dissertation, said that at that time, I think it was 40% of his institution surveyed did utilize that sort of feedback from folks who reported to them. So a fair number, even 8 or 9 years ago, were doing it. It certainly relates to you and me as a supervisor and our comfort with it. I think if you picked them all up here, never read them, and put them in the circular file over here, threw them out, I think if you did no more than that, of course that wasted people's time, money, and copying. If you did more than that, I think you would have, in your own way, engendered some support of people believing that you're interested, because that'd be unethical. But I'm just saying, if you did know more, and certainly if you do something with it, I think they're going to have an interest. They're going to think you're kind of trying to stay with it. That's a good question. Other comments or questions? Yes, sir.
I think one of the biggest challenges about evaluating a group of people is typically you're going to have some outstanding people that are not too difficult to evaluate. And you may have weak people who frankly are not too difficult to evaluate because you know what the problems are. It's those people in the middle who only are willing to take care of minimum expectations. And if there are no motivating factors for them to do beyond that, such as the salary program and so on, and typically those people are the ones that have been employed for a long period of time and are maybe just have 4 or 5 years left of retirement, things like that.
Okay.
I think that's the most difficult group to try to get them to rise above the minimum expectations. And evaluating them, trying to keep from being negative in your evaluation and try to stay positive and so on is a real challenge.
That's a great point. Let me ask you this question on your comment. Is it okay on this mythical scale of 1 to 5, and 3 is good or average? Let's just say today the person is a 3, is a good or average. May even have some shades of needs improvement. Number 2. What's wrong with that person? And or can they still be a contributing team member if they're good or satisfactory, even with some shades of need improvement? I think we're all mostly nod our head. That's okay. That person's on the payroll and contributing, and yet we're saying, good point. How do we motivate that person? How do we get them, ideally, to become a number 4 performer? And granted, that's part of what we get paid for to be supervisors, is to learn and know our people well enough that we strive to get them there, knowing that some of us will be better at that or succeed more with some individuals than others. But I guess part of my feeling in response to that is it's still what we're paid for, and we need to try, even though I may not get that person or any of those people who are goods or satisfactory higher. And yet, I got to be careful of my value judgment there too. Now let's see, is good or satisfactory? I didn't say it's bad, but there is a distinguishing element between good or satisfactory and, let's say, merit in my mind. So those are tough judgments we have to make, but I appreciate your point. It's like not killing the messenger, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, you know? You got to be careful that, well, gosh, John, because I evaluated you as good, go home and be depressed. Pretty important message. Is it a value to be called good or satisfactory?